Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Dugdale, and I'm the Operations Manager at Spectra. And on behalf of Richmond and Wandsworth Council, we are supporting Brook Charity's Sexual Health Week, which this year is supporting RSE and is campaigns called Get Your RSE in Gear. What we will be doing is putting a link to the Brook website in the comments. And you'll see it along the screen as well. For more resource, there's a great sort of level of resource there for people who are needing some information about RSE and what you can obtain and what you can get, in addition to the discussions that we'll be having today. I'm joined by some colleagues today from Metro and also colleagues who work with me at Spectra. As I said, we are commissioned by Wandsworth and Richmond councils to provide services, of which we'll go into further along in the discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you to Amanda, who is from Metro.
Hi, everybody. My name's Amanda Jeffrey, and I am the head of sexual and reproductive health over at METRO Charity. And like John, I'd like to welcome you today. I'm very excited about our chat, and I will pass you over to my colleague, Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Archer. I'm the Young Person's Sexual Health Coordinator at Spectra. So we do a lot of RSE work, group work, one-to-one work. So yeah, it's kind of exciting seeing it all kicking off and kind of exciting having these conversations with colleagues about how we can support. Hand over to Ellen.
Hi, my name is Ellen, and I'm the South West London and Bexley Sexual Health Lead at Metro. I'm really excited to be chatting with you all today and be talking about RSE and answering some of your questions. And I'll pass you on to Ollie.
Hi, my name's Ollie O'Donoghue. I work for Spectra. I'm a relationships and sex youth worker and a counsellor for adults as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to what this next hour may reveal to us regarding RSE.
Cool, thanks everybody. So RSE, we're going to start with a very open question, and I think we'll just see, you know, where we go with it. If you do have anybody who's watching or anybody kind of listening to us, if you do have any questions, then please put them in the comment section of whichever kind of, you know, platform you're using, and we will try to answer them as soon as possible. If not, obviously we will be able to kind of follow up afterwards. So to kick off with, I'm going to open it up with a very generic, what is RSE? We know it stands for Relationship and Sex Education, and has been something that is quite, I suppose, driven in the media, has been quite contentious at times. Has been, you know, we've seen kind of lots of activity about, you know, relating to things being taught in schools in Birmingham. So, you know, we've seen a lot of media activity. Interestingly, you know, RSE was going to be known as SRE, so Sex Relationship Education. But fortunately, and I personally think for the better, it's been changed to RSE. So the focus is on relationships and sexual education. I think we've talked about earlier that you know, relationship is the foremost urgent part of being things that relationships should be taught in education. The sex education will come organically, naturally, but again, that's for discussion. So I'm going to open it up to everybody here, and I know Kat and Ollie have sort of had experience working with young people. And what do you think RSE should be, how it should be taught? You know, there's a focus now. It's September 2020. It should have come into schools being taught. There's, you know, kind of debate as to how it should be taught, when it should be taught, what length it should be taught. So yeah, so I'd be interested to kind of hear what you guys have to say. So.
I'm happy to kick off. Yeah, as John said, it used to be known as SRE, and why do we flip the R and the S around? My view is that we're relational beings. To be a human being is to relate So right now I'm having a relationship with all you viewers who are watching. When I go into a school, I'm forming a relationship with teachers, with students, with my boss, with the person in the shop, whatever it might be. And until that's formulated, I can't even really begin to think what my relationship might end up being with something as contentious and as primal as what kind of sex I might want to have, or what kind of sex I might teach others to, find out what they want to do with their sex lives. So, I think first and foremost is, what is our relationship to the idea of having RSE in the very first place? And, it's contentious. And a lot of schools can think of it as something that perhaps gets tagged on to PSHE, or can get perhaps cornered and siphoned out depending on the culture of said school, whether there's religious angles in those schools. And my concern is that actually the idea that relationships education, first and foremost, with or without the sexual part, is, it's already part of our lives in every which way. Every part of our lives is relational. So to not make it explicit and to not integrate it into the very cultures in which we exist, starting with our educational system, seems unwise. That's my thoughts to start with.
Kat, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think kind of building on what Ollie said, I think the focus, the backlash seems to have been around the sexual health, the sexual education side of things, but actually sexual education, even within the work we do already in teaching relationships and sex education sessions, the sex education is kind of a part of it. Actually, the fundamental focus is on relationships, it's on communication, it's on, those kind of dynamics. And as Ollie said, there's so much to that is, happens outside of what is potentially a sexual relationship. And, you kind of need to teach that relationship stuff to then, to have any way of teaching anything about sexual education. To my mind, so we talk about education, we talk about, whether school is the right place for relationship sex education. Should it be something that's taught at home instead? So you're kind of taking it back to the idea of, well, what's the purpose of school? And you kind of going back to the kind of classic things like the 3 R's of education, being reading, writing, arithmetic, and actually adding RSE as a kind of 4th R to that. So if you think kind of within the times of COVID and children being off school and young people being away from school, a lot of the concern around that wasn't necessarily to do with my child's going to forget maths. It was to do with them missing out on forming these fundamental social relationships. And so there is awareness that school provides that. And so to me, RSE and focus on relationships education feels like a fundamental part of schooling anyway. This kind of bringing in compulsory RSE is just kind of putting a stamp on that, making it more explicit, and actually giving an opportunity for schools to do that in a really productive, thought out, integrated way. But yeah, so I think, there's an element of sex education, but actually relationships kind of underpin everything. So you kind of need to start there with RSE.
Cool. Interesting. I mean, obviously there's been backlash in the media about, and again, the focus has been on kind of the sex element. I mean, does anybody else have any other comments about, do we think we need to there needs to be a kind of a bigger promotional angle in the media about how we this is sort of educate. So do we need to educate Britain, if you like, as to what RSE is about? I don't know, Amanda, Ellen, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I can go. I think so. I think that it's the difficulty is that historically, both in this country and in other countries as well, I think sex education or sex and relationships education has either been non-existent and or very poor, and has usually focused on just the very finite biological aspects of sex. So sexual health, sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, and we've lost sight over the years, I think, of the fact that sexual health happens in the context of relationships. So whether they're, one relationship with another person or multiple relationships, And I think that what is happening is that as we are starting to understand, you know, not the errors, but the flaws or the gaps in, you know, what we have done in the past, people are starting to talk about it more. And I think that it's fair to say that it is uncomfortable for many people to think about sex, to talk about sex, to communicate about it in a way that they've never done before. They're not used to. So I think for a lot of parents, when they hear that you know, their child is going to be participating in an education that not only they are unfamiliar with, but they never had themselves. I think it's very normal that people can get scared, and they can feel a little bit uncomfortable. They can have a lot of fear about it, and I think we also need to recognize that there's a huge stigma interculturally and broadly around sex and relationships. And when people are worried that their children are being taught something that they themselves don't understand, I think that that is where a lot of the backlash comes. So absolutely, I think we need to do a much better job than we do of saying what RSE is. You know, I think for a lot of parents, if they knew that their child was being taught about consent and negotiating condom use and how to be safe and how to reduce risk, I think they'd be a lot more open to the fact than this sort of, you know, scary dark cloud that they think of, you know, that we're, you know, saying to their children, go out and have sex and here's the tools to do it. It's not that at all. So yes, I think we need to be a lot clearer about what we're doing. Why we're doing it. I think we need to be a lot clearer about the research, which very clearly shows that the better and earlier RSE, the better somebody's sexual health will be, and in actual likelihood, the later they are likely to have their first sexual experience.
Cool. I mean, you know, we were talking earlier before we came online, and you know, for someone who is kind of, you know, touching 50, my sexual education at school, be it at a Northern Comprehensive, was basically in a biology lesson watching a video about cows having sex, and that was it. It was very biological, and you know, I think, you know, as a gay man who struggled with his sexuality throughout that, to have been taught, you know what good relationships are, what kind of, you know, different you know, issues you may sort of face, would have been a lot more kind of welcoming, you know, and I think, you know, hopefully coming in the years to come, that will help a lot of young confused people. So, and I think it's great that we get to kind of to do that. Ellen, did you have anything to add on that question before we move on?
Yes. So I basically just obviously agree with what have already been said and how important it is to kind of, as you said about relationship education, is basically the foundation for like to then move on to talking about sexual health and other things. And I feel like it was something, even though I'm a bit younger, there was a lot of things that were lacking from my sexual health education, and no one really talked about relationship. We talked about, like, it was very biological, and it was very like focused on these are the STIs, this is pregnancy, this is this, but no one actually talked about the relationships that we're forming with other people. And no one talked about the different relationships, or talked about boundaries and consent. And I mean, I think it teaches a lot of young people about their bodily autonomy and or kind of the bodily boundaries and what they're okay to do with other people and how to say no. And also, as Amanda said, how to negotiate condom use, how to stay safe. So yeah, it's really important to have that aspect. And as Amanda said, and everyone said as well, that a lot of kind of parents and stuff are getting quite scared about it because they might not have any knowledge of what it contains, and they might see it as a stepping stone for their children to go out and be unsafe and have sex, whereas it's not that at all. It's to make sure that when young people do decide that they want to be sexually active, or when they do decide that they want to go into any form of relationships, that they're safe doing so. So yeah.
Clearly. Okay, kind of moving on. Sort of our next point of topic, topic of conversation rather, was I suppose taking this from a young person's point of view now, as to would a young person, I'm going to perhaps start with Ollie on this, that, you know, do or will young people feel witnessed, listened to, respected and seen? What do you think about
depends who's witnessing them. You know, a large part of my job, well, a recent part of my job actually, has been to train professionals around how to work with adolescents using a trauma-informed perspective. What that means, as condensed as I could possibly make it, is to think of young people's behaviors, be that violence or sexuality or CSE, you name it, is to think of those aspects as a form of communication, that something unconscious is being communicated. So the idea that violence actually might be the only way a young person can regulate an internalized state of trauma that's going on within them, which of course, from an outside perspective, feels frightening for someone to be in the presence of. But if we offer that trauma-informed lens upon that, then it might offer professionals, adults, whoever works with adolescents, the opportunity to afford young people that space to go, actually, while this young person is expressing violence, what I'm actually realizing is that it's distress that I'm seeing. Ultimately, this young person is distressed and they're trying to communicate that distress. And they haven't been taught how. They haven't been taught how to relate to things outside themselves in a way that is healthy and grounded and not scary to be around. And so we get caught in a cycle where, you know, forms of discipline might include putting young, violent people in isolation as a form of discipline. So you're taking a young person who's already expressed a state of trauma and you're putting them in an isolated space. It's really, really destructive and really unhealthy. But then teachers are caught, right? They're caught in a space where they're going, you know, how else am I supposed to deal with this person when they're potentially putting my safety at threat and other young people's safety at threat? So it's a really, really, really fine line. And it starts, I think, us speaking to professionals and really actually, before we can listen to young people and witness young people and respect young people, we need to actually listen. Are we listening to each other as professionals? Are we really sitting down and asking professionals, what is it you need? Do you feel supported in your job? And to meet each other at the level that we're at, because I think there's a tendency with the RSE thing, even now, to kind of to us men situation and to go, no, you need to listen to us, you need to do RSE, and then there's the them that go, no, RSE is really bad. There's some space where actually we're all trying to get to the same point. We're all in fear about what happens if we don't, and actually being charged by that fear so much that beneath what we're really trying to do gets missed altogether. I'm being a bit abstract there. But.
No, before I go to Kat, I from a personal point of view, I know two people who are teachers who are, if anything, they're scared about, because they're not sure what they have to teach. Then it's not something that they were taught at teacher training. It's not a subject that is kind of known to them. Yes, they can follow a curriculum to a degree, but it's how do you, if they're not you know, if they don't have the resource to deliver it, how do they cope with anything that will come out of that? Cope with, you know, somebody coming and going, how do I use a condom? How do I have sex? How do I have this? So yeah, I quite agree that, you know, before we start educating the young people, we need to educate the educators, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, yeah, because if I'm teach young people about relationships and sex, what that first is going to do is it's going to confront me about how much do I know about my own ability to conduct healthy relationships and healthy sexual relationships. So for every adult or professional that we're saying, look, we need to work with young people with RSE, what we're really saying to those adults is you also need to look at your own RSE. And that's really confronting. And if we can have first some space, some compassion for those adults who are going, I don't want to look at that stuff in my life. I want to have my kids, have my family, get on with my life, or whatever it is, whatever life they're choosing to have. You know, not everyone wants to have to look at their own RSE. But if we were asking adults to work with young people with it, we're first of all really asking them to work with it themselves too.
Totally agree. Anybody else wants to come in on that question before we move on? Amanda.
Yeah, I think so. Having done sort of this or similar work for quite a long time, so I've got some bad glare. Hopefully, you can all still see. Is that a lot of the times people, it's not that they're not happy, and I think that this would be true for teachers or educators whom I've spoken to also. It's not that they're not happy to do it. It's that a lot of the times they don't think that they're able to do it, or they don't know how to do it, or they don't know what specifically to do. And I think as a consequence, what that means is that when somebody does bring up sexual health with a young person, be them a teacher or a school nurse or a pharmacist, they go in thinking, okay, what I want to get out of this exchange is X or Y or Z. So I want to get that young person a condom, or I want to get that young person a chlamydia screen, or I want to make sure that person isn't being groomed. But they do it in such a way that's like, there's an anxiety and a nervousness from them, probably because a lot of the times they've never had good sexual health education. And so they're not sure how to approach conversations with young people in a way that does allow that young person to feel witnessed and listened to and respected and seen. And I think it makes it a very difficult interaction for both parties. So you've got the person who is uncomfortable delivering the sexual health intervention or education, and then you've got the young person who's often desperate to ask questions and say something or share something or explore something, and neither party knows how to do that. And I think that's where we as sexual health experts can really make an impact, is, we can work like Ollie, and like some of the work that we do with Metro around training professionals, to say, okay, this is how you ask an open question, and this is the kind of thing that a young person might say, and this is the services that you could refer to if you feel that it's getting too much for you. And then we can also work with young people. I'm thinking through things like peer mentoring, or 360-degree feedback, or different kind of educational tools where they can actually say, these are the questions that we want to be asked. Because I think that the government kind of guidance on RSE is very vague, and I don't think that helps teachers, and I don't think it helps young people either. So what we need to be doing, I believe, as sexual health experts and advocates in a way, is trying to push and to create spaces where people can have a dialogue that's facilitated and supported by people who know how to do it. And then hopefully over time, the next generation and then the generation after that won't be quite as uncomfortable with it.
Completely agree. Kat and LNG, I know you've perhaps got a few things to add to that as well.
Yeah, so just kind of adding to this kind of idea about open communication, and kind of giving those opportunities where young people feel comfortable and they feel like they can ask a question and they'll get a reasonable answer, or the answer that's actually useful to them. It's interesting. So sort of my background before working for Spectra and working specifically in sexual health, worked for a drug and alcohol support charity. And even so, in schools and delivering sessions about drugs and alcohol, young people, even after those sessions, which have had nothing to do with sexual health, they kind of have this perception of, oh, I can ask you about these kind of awkward, embarrassing things. And they would ask, like, I'd done a whole session about, I think it was about alcohol use, and the young person at the end was like, how do you know if you've got herpes? And I'm like, okay, but you've created a space where young people feel comfortable and they feel like they can ask you stuff, and so they ask everything they've ever wanted to ask an adult about something that's slightly embarrassing, because you've created an environment where they feel like they can do that. And yeah, I think there needs to be more investment in actually training school staff to deliver RSE, because it's being expected that this is going to happen, but up until now, there's been very limited training available. And actually, yeah, it has to be someone who's comfortable and happy delivering it, because otherwise, yeah, it's going to be very limited. Like from my own experience in school, a lot of our sex education was delivered by our RE teacher, and who was just very uncomfortable. And you could tell she was uncomfortable. And so obviously we were all awful towards her. But it's just, actually, it's so much more effective if everybody there is happy having those conversations, because to start a conversation, you can't guarantee what's going to come up, and you need to be able to kind of navigate that in some way. But obviously you can't just wait able to do that. So there needs to be kind of, as you say, like the training that's provided by people who are experts in this field needs to be provided to the teachers who are going to be expected to deliver RSE effectively.
Just before we go in, we've had a comment, somebody from Fred, who's actually a former Metro staff, and his comment is quite interesting. I think that basically he's obviously now working in a school. One challenge is that school governance and leadership, having RSE and its diversity higher up the agenda for development. I think we've kind of touched on that, but also perhaps the time available for staff development, and more so, with what's happened recently with COVID, there are more of the challenges, which kind of the time available is restricting and doesn't allow time to learn the new skills around RSE, from which comes confidence. So I think we've kind of touched on this, but it seems I think that comment from Fred sort of illustrates that point as well. There is kind of, sorry, Amanda, yeah, you wanted to come back to that one?
Yeah, just absolutely. So one of the boroughs that we work in actually did, when we thought that RSE was still coming out in 2019, commissioned a huge and very supportive piece of work whereby once a quarter we were working with an organization called SEF, or the Sex Education Forum, all around supporting PSHE leads and teachers to sort of upskill themselves around RSE. And what we found every quarter was that there was either no or very poor engagement. And I think there was two factors. One is exactly as Fred notes, that if it wasn't a priority for their higher up, it wasn't therefore a priority for them. I think the second one is that the time is absolutely, if people are asked to do something but they're not given them the time to actually develop the skills, and these aren't skills that come quickly, these are skills that take time and nurturing and exploration, then how are we expecting them to do it? And the third thing is that I think that it's people don't understand why sexual health is a priority. So it's a little bit of a sort of, that's not my job. And, this is not a slight on teachers. Teachers have so much on their plate. But if they don't understand why it's important and why specifically their role is important, then you're not going to get buy-in. And so a lot of people will think, well, I signed up to teach maths or, physics or this. I didn't sign up to teach sexual health. And that's hard, and, we need to understand that and accept that it takes time to get people on board, and that we need buy-in right from the top level of the school. Absolutely.
I agree. I mean, and again, a teacher friend of mine has kind of said, if this is hopefully something you'd like to think now moving forward would be taught in kind of teacher training or in, and things like that there would be. And I know that's in an ideal world, and we do, but moving forward, like you say, yeah, most people go into with a view to teach physics or history or thing, they're not there to teach physics and sex ed or RE and or relationship education. It's so yeah, moving forward, hopefully that would work. Just before we kind of carry on, obviously I'd just like to say thanks for all the comments. If anybody does have questions, just stick them in the comments section on the chosen platform before we move on. Ellen, anything to add to that sort of last section?
So yeah, also as well, what was touched upon is if a teacher feel confident and comfortable talking about sex and relationships, then that will kind of have an impact on the students as well. The students will feel like it's okay to talk about, it's comfortable to talk about, it's nothing that's awkward or embarrassing. Whereas like as many people probably had, I don't know, a math teacher coming in really didn't want to do relationship and sex education, but kind of just was shoved into there to do it, and was really nervous, really awkward about it. And that obviously makes students feel awkward and nervous, and like they can't really ask the questions that they want to ask. So yeah, and obviously that comes with support, that comes with like helping teachers and educating teachers so they feel confident and comfortable teaching this, and also giving them the time to develop the skills and having kind of workshops on how to teach sex ed.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to let next kind of topic to talk we were looking at was and I can't find my questions. Kind of again from a young person's point of view, how do you think they would feel being their true selves? They would feel safe. I mean, Kat, I don't know if you want to kind of kickstart with that one.
Yeah. So I think Ollie mentioned earlier the idea that in teaching RSE, there's kind of teachers are kind of putting themselves out there in a way. And I think when you're asking young people to engage in RSE, there's that kind of sense of anxiety around that as well. Like, well, if I don't know something that I'm supposed to know, how do I ask that question? How do I feel safe to ask that question? From a wider sense of kind of just being within a school, you know, the kind of secondary school age, which is the age I think most of us are working with, is you've got that kind of formative development going on, that identity development. There's so much kind of change and so much that you're kind of questioning and learning about yourself. And school is that kind of a fundamental place where it's supposed to kind of provide that security. And it's sort of, how do they do that? I know we've spoken briefly before about the idea of, again, you know, not slating schools and aware that they have kind of limited time, but the idea that schools will potentially do like an assembly during LGBT History Month. And that's kind of it in terms of like, we're an inclusive school. But actually, if you're an LGBTQ plus student in that school, is that enough to make you feel like you are safe, you can be yourself, you can kind of, you know, you are supported in that space?
And perhaps not to feel tokenistic. I think sometimes there's an element of, you know, a box ticking element to it. I think you said something. There was a thing we've seen on the news this week about a school in Carshalton. You can perhaps talk about that as well.
Yes, so one of the Carshalton schools, I think they've kind of done I don't know if it's a mural thing. In my mind, yeah, they've done like a whole big rainbow corridor, which feels like it's kind of a step up from, this is our like board for LGBT History Month. It feels a lot more like, actually, if you're a student at that school, an LGBTQ plus student, does that make you feel kind of safer? And it feels more like a, yes, no, this is somewhere where I can be myself and I will be supported and listened to. A lot of schools are moving towards training their staff up as sort of trans champions and things like that. And so it's those kinds of things which actually, in terms of supporting your students to feel safe, are kind of fundamental elements where, you know, having that kind of cultural integration of inclusivity and support, I think, makes a massive difference. And allows students to engage more with that whole schooling process beyond just attending and sitting in lessons.
Yeah, completely. I think it's very much, like I said, you know, it's not like just like a notice board that's got a poster for a youth group where maybe 2 people turn up. It's the constant kind of, you know, assurance, if you like, to people, you know, again, I remember being that 14-year-old gay kid in school and thinking, you know, and obviously there was nothing of that. We're talking, this is like, God, the 1980s. But, you know, to think now that if you had that, you would see that in a corridor and think, okay, yeah, there is some security, there is somewhere I can go. Because, and we've said this before, that, you know, for a lot of young people, school is their safe space. You know, for other things that's happening in their lives, school is where they go and where they spend a lot of time. And meeting people like yourselves and Ollie and other kind of, you know, professionals, that's their connection. And undoubtedly the first people that maybe they will have disclosed to about, you know, their sex lives or their gender preferences or anything really. So yeah. Anybody else in the panel want to kind of add anything to that?
Oh, go on, Amanda.
I'll unmute myself. Yeah, I think as well, there's a sense of making young people feel safe by allowing them to accept that it's a learning process that you might go through together. And what I mean by that, it's a little bit abstract, and I apologize if it is, but what I mean by that is that if a young person realizes that they can throw anything at you, and they'll either answer it openly and respectfully, or if you don't know the answer, you'll explore it with them openly and respectfully. I think that goes a long way to creating a space where RSE is effective. So I often tell the story, so apologies if you've heard it before, and apologies to poor Mr. Pattison, my 6th grade biology teacher. Maybe it was 8th grade, I don't even remember. Anyway, poor Mr. Pattison was lumped with the task of teaching sexual health to some, you know, fairly belligerent 13-year-old students. And, you know, as is always the case, you know, every sort of RSE or, you know, sexual health workshop I've ever done with young people, it always starts with, you know, 1 or 2 young people throwing what they feel are, you know, difficult questions at you and seeing how you're going to respond. So, you know, often they'll ask about anal sex or about, you know, masturbation or about something like that and try and throw you off. And I think as soon as they realize that you're not going to be thrown off, the whole room settles down a little bit. And they go, okay, you've got me, you're holding me, you're caring for me. That's great. We can do this together. Poor Mr. Pattison was not like that. He, somebody said to him, you know, when you ejaculate, can you feel it coming out? And he shriveled and he fell apart in front of the class, and that was it. He'd lost the goodwill. And all I remember learning from that biology lesson was that there is no actual bone in the boner. And that was it. That's what we took away from it. And it was because he didn't feel safe enough with his own sexual health and his own understanding to carry us as a group. And I think for young people, particularly now that we are so much more comfortable talking about gender identity and sexual identity and different kinds of relationships and different kinds of households, the people and the person who are delivering the RSE need to be comfortable as well. And I think that helps a young person feel safe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Sorry, just chipping before you comment, Ollie. I mean, you know, I've been fortunate to kind of, you know, join Ollie on some of the stuff that he's done with boys and young men in some certain schools in the Wandsworth area. And, you know, one of my concerns is you come out of it and, you know, the young boys, especially young boys, and obviously spoken to some girls, their reference points for what they classify as relationships today, you know, it's Pornhub. For, you know, young girls, they see things like Love Island as the be all, and, you know, and what they should aspire to. And that's, you know, it's kind of like, no, this is where, you know, that is not a relationship. This is where we need to, you know, even, you know, just telling, you know, describing what a relationship is. Some young boys had realized that they'd actually been on a proper date, but was it a date because they didn't get sex at the end of it? So it's, but, you know, it's, yeah, I agree. I think it's, you know, it's quite difficult at times. Ollie, sorry, you were going to comment. Sorry.
It's fine. Like, I think the question, you know, does being myself feel safe? You know, what does it mean to be myself? And, you know, you can work with it on one level in terms of gender and sexuality, but you can then work on another level of, can I be vulnerable in this space? Can I be open? Can I be honest? Right? And that applies to everyone. And I think, you know, bouncing off what Amanda was saying, is that we don't know what's going on in teachers' lives. We don't know how safe they feel in their lives. And, you know, when I was, you know, teaching teachers about, you know, a trauma perspective on these things, the main aim of that training actually wasn't really about what it's like to be an adolescent in trauma. It was what it's like to be a human being who experiences trauma. And if you're delivering, or if you're asked to deliver RSE and say you're a full-grown adult with a history of sexual abuse that you perhaps haven't processed and would prefer not to, that's not going to be a safe situation for you. But how do we make those teachers, how do we give an environment to those teachers where they feel safe enough to boundary themselves from being asked, you know, can you do some RSE, without them needing to feel like they need to tell why they don't want to do that teaching as well. So the stuff walks a really fragile and vulnerable line, actually. And, you know, I'm always asking myself whenever I go into a workshop, how safe do I feel in this room? Because if I don't feel safe in that room, you can bet your bottom dollar that's going to ripple out into that room really, really fast.
Sorry, I should unmute. Anybody else to add to that one before we move on? No. Just before we kind of go back onto subject, we've been asked to kind of perhaps just give a brief overview of what the services we deliver in respectively in Richmond and Wandsworth. Amanda, do you want to kind of kick off with what Metro offers for the two boroughs, and then we'll perhaps talk about what Spectra does?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So actually, Aileen, should I pass over to you for this one? So Aileen's just joined us on board at Metro, so we can, do you want to, or would you prefer I answer?
No, I can answer.
Right.
So yeah, I joined Metro about almost 2 months ago now. So I've been very busy with our new scheme called Get It, where young people can sign up online. If you're over 16, you can sign up online on getit.org.uk, and you can order free STI kits for chlamydia and gonorrhea, You can also sign up to get a C card and to get free condoms, and whatever you order always comes in a plain packaging. It comes delivered to your address. It's really simple. It's very straightforward. You can just go visit the site. Also, if you are under 16, alternatively, you can go to one of the outlets and register with, for example, a pharmacist. They just ask you a few questions and help you with registration. And it only takes about 15 minutes. And then you can be able to get a C card or chlamydia and gonorrhea test. You can pick up condoms. So yeah, I've been very busy promoting our new Get It service, which has been really good. So go sign up. Very simple, very straightforward.
Hopefully we can get the guys in the back room can put the link to the Get It website up as well.
Yeah,
so,
I was just going to say, can production put the Get It link down at the bottom?
yeah, that would be a good idea.
Yeah, and just quickly to expand on that, thank you, and officially welcome, Aylin. Just to quickly expand on that, so what we do provide sort of overall in Wandsworth and Richmond is the National Chlamydia Screening Program, so the NCSP for short, which is where anybody under the age of 25 has access to a free chlamydia and gonorrhea screen. And as Aylin said, we do that via our website, Get It. The website will be coming up shortly. And we also do it in person, so schools, youth groups, pharmacies, GP practices, all over the place. We also provide the free condom scheme. So it's either called Come Correct if you're visiting a site, or Get It if you are online. And the other side of our services, so we don't have a rep here today because this is really focused on RSE, but we also provide HIV support services. So for people who are living with HIV in Wandsworth and Richmond. And if you're interested in that, visit our Metro site and you can get in contact with our HIV team for some more information around that. Aylin probably didn't know about that, so I thought I'd pop in and say.
Cool.
Yeah, Amanda, you have a better overall picture. You've been with Metro for way longer than me.
I've been doing this a long time, Aylin.
Yeah, that's amazing after 2 weeks. Yeah, so thanks for that. Spectra, I'm going to hand over to Ollie. He can give a bit of detail about what is going to work with this as well. Spectra.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, go on.
Sorry. Well, I can say a bit about what I do, and then you can fill in the gaps.
Yeah, cool.
So I am a relationships, sex, and identity mentor for young people in Bondsworth, which means I deliver one-to-one mentoring work around relationships and sex from anyone as young as 13 up to 18, sometimes older. The majority of clients are 14, 15. All sorts of presentations, gender, sexuality, ethnic, cultural backgrounds. I would say that makes up the predominant client base. I also deliver workshops, mainly to boys and young men, but also to girls and young women. I deliver assemblies, training to professionals, which I've already mentioned. Some of this involves sexual health screening, but a large portion of the mentoring is much more on the relational side of things. But if a young person is presenting with a direct frontline issue around a sexual health concern, then we would deal with that either through signposting or front of line, depending on where I am. So I find myself running around Wandsworth a lot, skipping from school to youth club and so on and so forth. Yeah, that makes up of what I do. Do you want to fill in the gaps, John?
Sure, yeah. So in addition to that, obviously, we're commissioned through CLCH and Wandsworth and Richmond councils to deliver a lot of what Ollie's just said. And in addition to that, we've got counselling provisions for people 18 and above. And in addition to that, we also provide Hiv outreach. So that, well, obviously not currently because we're kind of restricted as to being able to go out and about, but we're slowly starting to dip our toe back into the real world. So yeah, we will have outreach sessions where, we've got people in venues such as libraries or shops or, PSE, public sex environments, and educating people around, HIV, STIs, providing condoms, and so on and so forth. We do a lot of work where we go into kind of venues such as universities, colleges, schools to deliver kind of workshops around, you know, relationships and again, sexual health and gender issues. And one of our big kind of services is for the trans community. So we have a big program for the trans community, including trans counselling, trans peer mentoring, and also which have become kind of really kind of important during lockdown, online social groups, which have, you know, proved to kind of just take off unbelievably, which is great. Kat works with us in Richmond and Wandsworth, but also Merton, which is one of our other kind of joint contracts, and throughout lockdown has been focusing on a new youth group. So I'll let her talk a bit about what they've been doing with the youth group.
Yeah, thank you. So our youth group is called Pyramid. So it's an LGBTQI plus specific youth group for young people 13 to 18. It was supposed to be an in-person based in Merton youth group, but open to pan-London young people. Obviously, we've launched it during lockdown, so it's all via Zoom. So it runs twice a week, so Monday evenings and Friday evenings. And yeah, so it's been massively successful actually, given that it launched during lockdown. So that's kind of our newest young persons project, as well as kind of the wonderful mentoring support. We also offer LGBTQI plus counselling specifically for young people as well. So all of the information around that can be found on our young persons website or our young persons Instagram, which is Student Spectra. The website's Spectra Student, Instagram Student Spectra, but if you Google it, it will come up. And you can join the membership forms all on the website, so you can just fill it in and send it in for both.
I've just sent the amazing kind of the guys in the back room the website, so hopefully they'll stick that up as well. But if not, I'm sure we can put that in the comment section afterwards. So yeah, thanks for that. That gives a kind of very brief overview of what we kind of do jointly together in the two areas. I'm conscious of the time that, you know, we've only got about 15 minutes left, and I know there's a few other areas that we wanted to cover. Amanda, do you want to kind of lead on? I know you've got a few questions as well.
Sorry, the typical issue of muting myself and not unmuting myself has arisen again. So yeah, I mean, some of the questions that I get asked a lot, or Aileen, I don't know if you had any questions, you sent them through to me as well, are often very specific, and it always reminds me that young people and not young people, not so young people, don't know nearly as much about sexual health as we think. And often I think, you know, when we go in and we do these sessions or workshops on a particular topic, I often think, oh, well, they're going to find this so boring, and, you know, this is information they already know. And more often than not, it isn't. It's very interesting to them, because it's just stuff that they've never thought about, or they've thought about and they've never had an answer to. One of the questions that comes up a lot, and I know Aileen, you'd mentioned this as well, was around how do you actually get an STI? So, you know, we often hear from young people, oh God, I'd know if my partner had an STI, or I'd know if I had an STI. And of course, we as sexual health experts know that that isn't the case at all. You know, STIs often have no symptoms whatsoever. Often, if they do have symptoms, those symptoms can take a long time to appear. So I'm just going to remind my colleagues to mute their microphone. I'm getting a fair bit of feedback if everybody's not muted. And the other thing is that they don't know. You know, a lot of times we still hear that people think STIs can be passed on by sitting on a toilet seat or by kissing. And yet they don't know that STIs, for example, can be passed on through unprotected oral sex. Or they don't know, you know, people think that anal sex, for example, is inherently less safe. Well, no, it isn't. It just needs to be, the safety for anal sex needs to just be done differently. And so that's one of the things that we get asked a lot from young people, is around STI transmission. So I always say that there's...
Sorry to interrupt. Just an interesting point of what you said recently. I actually tested somebody last week, and they brought up that very same, the reason they were testing is because they started to share a house with somebody, and they thought they could catch an STI or HIV from a toothbrush. And you know, so there's still a lot of work to be done. So sorry to interrupt, but I just thought it was quite pertinent that only a week ago I had that sort of feedback. So
yeah, absolutely. I remember being in university, and a girlfriend of mine, she won't be watching this, so I don't think she'll mind if I say it. But caught genital herpes. What am I talking about? Genital warts. And she was convinced that she'd caught it because she was sharing the same shower seat as her flatmate, who she believed to have genital warts. And of course, the likelihood was that wasn't the case. Now I know that. Of course, when I was 19, I didn't know that. Anyway, so just, for the record, the general ways that we can catch an STI are very easy to remember. So it's oral sex. So oral sex that happens without a condom if there's a penis involved, or a dental dam if there's a vulva involved. Anal sex, again, unprotected. Penetrative vaginal sex, and then something called mutual masturbation, which is where you might touch yourself and then touch somebody else and then touch yourself, and also through sharing sex toys. Sometimes STIs can be passed on through fisting as well. If anybody knows what fisting is, we need to make sure that we do that safely. And through rimming, if we know what rimming is, we can make sure that we can do that safely as well. And STIs can also sometimes, although not very often anymore in the UK, can be passed on from mum to baby during childbirth. So herpes in particular can get passed on if the baby's traveling through the vaginal canal, and the mum has herpes. Sometimes, although again not very often anymore, we see chlamydia or gonorrhea as eye infections in little babies, and again it's through the transfer through the mucous membrane. And sometimes we know that HIV can be passed on through breastfeeding or breast milk if the mother is not on effective treatment. So those are generally the ways. So that leads me to say, of course, that the way to protect yourself is make sure that for any sex where there's penetration, either of an anus or of a vagina or of a mouth, make sure that you're using a condom. And if there's any possibility that your mouth might come into contact with either an anus or a vulva, that you are using a dental dam or some sort of other protection. And of course, the best thing to do is make sure that you get tested, so that both you and your partner or partners are aware of their status for STIs and can get treatment as needed. That was a little lesson. Yes, Aylin.
So yeah, also like talking about how to protect yourself from STIs. Obviously, I think it gets forgotten quite a lot about using dental dams or condoms when performing oral sex. I think that often gets forgotten, but it's really important. And also, I would always say as well, have an open conversation. It doesn't need to be something that's boring and very clinical, but ask the person you're having any sexual activity with, have you gotten tested, and did you last get tested? And I have that kind of it's good if we can make that kind of conversations a norm, and also obviously go for regular testing, because one thing as well that young people often ask is, how do I know who gave me an STI, or can I know how long I've had an STI for? And the answer is basically no, because a lot of STIs are, as Amanda said, are asymptomatic. For example, chlamydia is very often that chlamydia doesn't give any symptoms at all. So it's very difficult tracing back to when you got chlamydia and exactly who gave you chlamydia. So.
Yeah, we also a lot of the times get asked, and this is obviously only true for young women or people with a womb who are having sex with somebody who could get them pregnant. We often get asked just outright, what is the best contraception? And the answer that I always say is it's not necessarily what is the best contraception. It's what is the best contraception for you. So I would never say to a young person, oh, go get the implant. It's going to be the best thing. It'll change your life. No, because it might not for that young person. It can depend on their hormonal profile, their lifestyle, their risk factors, what other medications they're taking, whether or not they get migraines, whether or not there's a family history. There's lots of different things. So, if you're a young person, or not a young person and, you're just curious, always make sure that you're using the services that are available to you. And I think more broadly, when we're thinking about RSE, if you're somebody who's teaching RSE and someone asks you those questions, the worst thing that you can do, I think, is try to give an answer that's uninformed. So either uninformed because you don't know the concept, or uninformed because you don't know the individual. So with RSE, we need to be very open and honest about the limitations of our knowledge, but also the limitations of the advice that we can give, and the situations that we can give advice in. And that's one of the key sort of takeaways I would say about good RSE is boundaried. And over the years I've learned to say, actually I don't know, and that doesn't come naturally to me, but I'll say, I don't know, let's look it up, or I don't know, give me your email and I'll come back to you. And I think that's really the best thing that we can do for young people.
Cool, thank you. I'm kind of very aware that we've got less than about 5 minutes of something that I think we could have booked 2 hours, we could have booked 3 hours for this, and we could have had the conversations could have gone and gone and gone because it just spawns other conversations. I think a lot of our respective kind of websites have a lot of information about the work we do, where you can access information, where you can access kind of condoms, C cards, STI screens, HIV tests. For anybody who's wanting information about our kind of counselling services and the sort of the work that we've done with schools, or you want to kind of look at getting referrals, then obviously again that's now on our website as well. I think before we kind of finish, I just thought I'd go around the panel and see if there was anybody has any last comments to make about RSE, your hopes for it, your fears for it, maybe. I don't know. Let's start with kind of Kat. I don't know if you've got anything to kind of
Yeah. I think for me, it's really interesting actually working in this field of work when RSE is becoming compulsory. I think in my mind, compulsory RSE is a really good opportunity for an entire generation of young people to kind of begin this kind of new wave of actually a level of awareness, kind of patient understanding and kind of confidence in their own choices. I guess then there's the kind of, I've worked in youth work for a long time, and I have kind of jaded skepticism, which I like, I try and keep it quiet and sort of, put that bit to one side. But actually, yeah, there is a concern that actually, and I'm kind of aware there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of challenges for schools in terms of how to, as we said, kind of upskill staff to actually deliver effective RSE. How are they going to make time in the curriculum, even before all the issues of actually you've had students who've missed 4 months of education, which you now need to catch up on. I have some concerns around actually, is this going to be this amazing thing that it could be, or is it going to end up being a kind of slightly elevated version of what we already have? As kind of mentioned, the guidance that's come out is still very limited. And it doesn't stop schools from still doing what a lot of them do at the moment, which is a kind of 1 drop-down day a year, which is something, but there's no evidence base for that. It's not proven effective as a form of education. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about RSE. Like, it's a really good opportunity for young people, but it's how that's engaged with, making use of our services, Metro services, to upskill professionals and make it as good as it could be. Yeah, that's my viewpoint on that.
Fingers crossed for the future. Anybody else? Ollie, Amanda, Ellen?
Yeah, I like some things have been coming up for me over the course of this conversation, thinking around, the protests, for example, that have happened in response to a compulsory RSE, and the temptation to, as I said previously, to kind of have an us and them situation, which means that we're always coming up against something. And I suppose there's something for me about thinking about, well, what's the fear that's being communicated through those protests? There's something that's really fearful and afraid. And can I first have compassion for those people, actually, and discover open and in a vulnerable and open space what the real fear is. I've also been thinking about the idea of, the fact that we bring relationships and sex together in this, yeah. And I'm also wondering about the advantages of how we can use them disparate from each other at first, before then bringing them together. And I've been thinking quite a lot recently about how things like attachment theory, which are it's a theory that we apply through the NHS, through social care. It's a well-recognized international theory that I think primary schools would lap up if it was delivered in the right way. And that would get the relationships part down from a very, very early young age without even bringing the context of sex in yet. So I'm wondering if there's something to be said for how we can drip feed the jigsaw puzzle that is the RSE, so people can all kind of do it at a pace, rather than it being going from this thing that we tagged on, and now it's this thing that mandatory that you must do, and if you don't do it, then you need to go and protest about it.
I don't know, Amanda, Ellen, anything to add before we call it today?
Yeah, I just got something very quick to add. When it comes to fears, I think I'm probably fearful that a lot of teachers are not feeling fully supported in it, that they're not given enough training and resources and the support they need to deliver. That is something that feels pushed upon them that they have to do. As Ollie said, with being compulsory, you have to do it. No, it's really bad. Like, I'm hoping that it will be seen as a massive opportunity, and a massive opportunity for getting this whole generation onto like a good path of understanding relationships and sex, and you know, that they're getting like a broader education that they bring with them for their entire life.
Yeah, it's good. Amanda, last few words.
Last few words. That's a job to keep me succinct. I think I won't talk about too much about my fears. I have a lot of them. But my hopes are that we can use this generation and the next generation of young people to really see what will happen, or what can happen, when we give people information, and information that is varied and relevant and accessible, and see what impact that has on choice and identity. So my hope is that, you know, the next generation of grown-ups, as is the best way to do it, are, you know, people who understand that we have a choice around how we identify, that we have a choice around how we present ourselves, that we have a choice around the relationships that we choose to enter into and stay in, and that those relationships can be different and look different, that we have a choice around the kind of sex that is pleasurable for us, regardless of our sexual identity or sexual orientation, and that we have a choice around things like contraception and emergency contraception and termination of pregnancy. So I think my hope really is information that leads to choice and to awareness.
Great. I can't believe, well, we're just over an hour. And I think, like I said, we could have, there are some questions we didn't get to. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we didn't do. I mean, so I'd like, first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for kind of joining us. Everybody who's been watching, again, thank you for and for all the comments that people have kind of put in the chat boxes. As I said, this has been a kind of discussion to support Brook's Sexual Health Week, and again, we'll put the link to the resource for Brook's website as well. So yes, it just leaves me to say thank you to Ellen, to Kat, to Ollie, to Amanda, to especially Julian at Richmond and Wandsworth Councils for kind of supporting us with this. And yeah,
That's his brainchild.
Yeah, his brain indeed. So yeah, big shout out to Julian, and thank you, and goodbye.